Hello and welcome. Um, Today I will be presenting on the medical procedure known as IUI. IUI stands for intrauterine insemination. And the first thing I'd like to do is just explain what that is and what that pertains, or I should say, even what it can pertain, and from a minimalist perspective all the way up to a maximalist. Because one of the things I found out is there's a whole spectrum of degrees of how IUI is utilized that needs to be understood in order to be able to make a sound decision on this. Um, in the simplest form, IUI is the taking of sperm and directly placing them into the uterus of a female. Um, on the extreme end, there can be medical interventions, there can be pills and fertility treatments and all of that. Now, the Catholic Church on the actual procedure of the IUI does not have an official stance. There has been a little bit of talk about it, but there has been no published encyclicals, no published anything from the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. It's simply the procedure itself they've left alone. Okay, um, and what happens with the IUI procedure is the physician collects a sample of the male's um, ejaculate, and they wash the ejaculate in a lab, and then in turkey baster style, they insert it. They go directly into the uterus, and they make the deposit. Sorry for the bluntness, but just you need to understand specifically what the procedure actually is. Um, Now, the first thing right off the bat that we can identify as being right or wrong is the procedure for collecting the sample. If it is collected via masturbation, then it is morally wrong. That's well established within the church, and we could end this video right here at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. um, However, um, it does not have to be collected by masturbation. It can actually be collected by a man and a woman, and for our purposes, a man and a woman who are validly married have vaginal intercourse, which culminates with the male ejaculating inside of his wife. And in modern medicine, it's actually possible for a physician to go in there, collect it, wash it, and then reinsert it farther up. From a very basic perspective, um, think of it as the doctor's giving the sperm road directions. I know that's very crude, but it creates the picture in the mind. The doctor's putting the sperm in the most ideal location for them to interact um, with the egg. If this is used in connection with any pills to increase ovulation, anything else, obviously we've already established that at the Catholic Church, that's not allowed. The washing procedure that I mentioned, very simply, it does not do anything to actually affect the sperm itself. That was something I researched and wanted to make sure of in my background research and everything else. Very simply, the fluid surrounding the millions of sperm in a male's ejaculate is there as essentially a delivery device. It allows it to be propelled in, it allows it to gives them something to swim through. But removing it does not affect anything as far as the fluid. Removing the fluid has nothing to do with increasing or decreasing the chances of pregnancy. And the only other thing that would be suggested, which is valid within the Catholic Church on the natural family planning, is understanding a woman's cycle and trying to time it when it would be most likely that the woman would be ovulating. So that way, naturally counting it out and timing it, so that way you get the highest percentage of possibly getting pregnant. Which also brings it to IUI has about a 20% success rate. So it's not perfect, it's not guaranteed, it's not IVF, it's not artificially fertilizing the eggs. It's simply putting the sperm in close proximity to where the eggs are and then letting nature take its course. So, the first book we're going to talk about is Pope John Paul II, Man and Woman, He Created Them, Theology of the Body. Most of us know this book as Theology of the Body, but I just want to read the full title there. And the key things I think relate to this is each and every marriage act must be open to a new life. So basically, every time the man and wife have sex, if a pregnancy occurs from it, then they are expected to accept it. I don't think there's any dispute in our Catholic teaching about this, and it is pretty straightforward. You know, man and a woman, they're married validly in the eyes of the church, they have sex. One of the very good fruits of that can be pregnancy. The Pope John Paul also points out there must be adequate foundation and maintaining the intimate structure of the conjugal act. What this means is that the act has to be natural, follow the natural law. The act must be a matter of love between the husband and wife and not a matter of a science experiment, put in simple terms. Must follow the natural law, so must have sex naturally. And then also pointing out that every aspect of moral norms is not necessarily covered in sacred scripture, but in a lot of cases it is covered in the tradition, in which case it is still covered. Because remember, our deposit of faith, we have the sacred scripture, we have the tradition, and specifically what it's talking about is Humanae Vitae, which basically in this case is looking for what is the norm, what is the natural law teach us about this situation, okay? The interaction between a man and a woman, and to what degree is science interfering with the natural act. So what I got out of reading through Pope John Paul II's book is what really needs to be looked at is what is the intent of the act, was the act adulterated in any way, not meaning adulterated, but was the act influenced in an unnatural way by medical science in order to attempt to create children, etc. I also looked at a book from a doctor named Daniel Potter, and excuse me, and it says, and the title of the book is "What to Do When You Can't Get Pregnant: The Complete Guide to All Options for Couples Facing Fertility Issues." Okay. One can obviously assume that this is going to be a very pro medical science, show up at my office and, you will leave pregnant, which honestly it is. But the other thing, what was interesting is that it showed me the different degrees of IUI. IUI can also be used for sperm bank situations, which in those cases there would be very much so evil attached. Because that would be someone making random donation, and then in some cases, they can open up a catalog and say, "Oh, this person's 25 years old, goes to Yale, and blah 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 blah," and get inseminated, and then they can have a baby. Okay, this is perverse. This is well outside the natural law, and it's not acceptable. The book also discusses other things besides IUI. IVF, which is the church does have a direct stance on, and is also perverse in that there is fertilization. There are fertilized embryos who get frozen, and don't ever become living human beings. Um, and it's just simply not acceptable. Excuse me. Um, but the interesting thing is, what I got out of this is the IUI procedure itself, when done in a manner that is consistent with other Catholic teachings, that the man and the woman um, have natural intercourse within marriage, and when there's, besides using natural family planning and knowing when the cycles are and everything else, it can be done in a way that the only medical act that's taken place is post intercourse, a physician going in, taking the sperm, and redirecting it to the uterus. So essentially moving it from point A to point B. So that was a very good perspective. This was a very well written book. It was very enlightening to the actual procedure itself. The risks are extremely low, according to him, but it was also a good education on what specifically the procedure is. The next article came from a peer-reviewed journal of Obstetrics Gynecology International, and the co-authors of this article were Abdelkader, excuse me, and Yen. And they looked at um, the title of the article is Potential Use of IUI as Basic Option for Infertility. And they're actually looking at this from a social justice perspective. They were looking at African communities and other places around the world where medical science is sadly not Western medicine, and this is a procedure that can actually be done very inexpensively. The IUI procedure, if you really break it down, from the article, it's an at cost to the physician if they are willing to do it pro bono, so they don't get paid for their services, there's simple equipment and everything else, for less than $100. Typically in the U.S., the procedure costs anywhere between 500 and 1,000 because physicians and lab techs like to get paid. But and they said for the people who this is a very effective way for people to be able to increase their odds up to 20% to have a baby when they're in situations that they might not otherwise be able to afford it. They were also very much so a champion of what we would call proportionalism, in that they were talking about the um, doing one thing, increasing the good without really looking at the bad, but making sure that the good is higher than the bad. So that was very interesting that was sort of incorporated into the article, not directly to our topic in moral theology at the graduate level of Franciscan University, but they were talking about the positives and negatives and the morality of it. And it was a very proportionalistic point of view. So what are my overall thoughts? I am not publishing my own encyclical here. I am not Pope Francis. But that being said, I think if the procedure is done in a way that has the right intent, it could potentially be an acceptable procedure. Nobody's playing God. Essentially what's happening here when you really break everything down is you're moving the sperm from point A to point B. Point B happens to be closer to where the eggs are located, which increases the odds. If the act is done between a man and a woman who are in valid marriage, if the act is done through vaginal intercourse, and it's simply moved from the vaginal canal to the uterus, I believe that the intention of the act is good, um, and I think it's important that people realize what they're doing. Um, and it's something that's not clear cut, which is possibly why we don't have a clear doctrine on this. But um, the intent, which is something we talked about in class a lot, the intent of the agents, the intent of the husband, the intent of the wife, the intent of the doctor. Um, the intent is, you know, if everything is in place, that's what needs to be looked at when we're making a moral judgment. Um, as far as fertilization of the egg, do this procedure that's being done naturally. As far as production of the sperm, as long as you do it through vaginal intercourse between a man and woman who are married, that's naturally and that's fine. Um, there are no chemicals. I mean, it's a special syringe with a special tip and everything else, but it's just to deal with the matter that they're dealing with. So, um, you know, I don't want to sound proportionalistic here, but so long as I think the key term is the intent of everybody involved, and if none of the established norms of the natural law have been violated, the procedure in itself, I don't believe has evil attached to it. I'm seeing I'm almost at 17 minutes, so I'm going to conclude here. But I found this topic fascinating, and it's something that isn't cut and dry, but needs to be evaluated on a case by case basis. Um, but is something also that can be very fruitful. And so long as the natural law is followed, I believe that it is a potentially good procedure. Thank you, and Merry Christmas coming up soon.